Deputy Holly Cairns has 10 minutes.
Thank you, Caoirleach, and thank you, Minister. I welcome the flood risk management section in the annual transition statement. The document highlights that there will be an increase in weather events resulting in an increased risk of flooding. Flooding has caused irreparable damage to communities and businesses in areas including West Cork, so we desperately need a proactive, whole-of-government and sustainable response. To properly deal with flooding, we must consider the broader landscape as well as taking into consideration our emissions and climate action commitments. We need to take action on planning, afforestation, piecemeal interventions and inadequate supports that have made communities more vulnerable. Too often, poor planning combined with inaction over years has resulted in communities flooding and then accepting highly invasive and expansive infrastructure when simple and more robust measures combined with good planning could have avoided and alleviated flooding. Flood management plans and a culture in the OPW indicate a preference for flood containment measures. That is hard engineering works that significantly impact on the natural and cultural landscape, such as massive permanent walls and embankments. Management plans, like the one for the Bandon Island River Basin in West Cork, include environmental considerations, but allow significant damage to biodiversity and fisheries, and no reference is made to the larger environmental impacts, such as the emissions associated with consistently building massive concrete walls. There is an insufficient use of a watershed approach which integrates flood protection, stream and wetland habitat restorations, and water quality improvements. Instead of looking at flooding in a piecemeal fashion, we need to be addressing it on a watershed scale. Cork's River Bride in Blackpool is a clear example. Years of minor schemes and developments, including building on floodplains, have contributed to recent flooding, and the only solution offered is to culvert, which will destroy a rich wildlife corridor flowing through the city. We should be planting protection forestry along rivers to preserve water quality and assist in flood management. We need to protect and restore our wetlands as natural defences for fluvial and coastal flooding. Only this week I received calls about damage being done to the Gary Lucas wetlands near Kinsale. Retention or storage upstream through attenuation and controlled flooding of natural floodplains, as well as sustainable urban drainage systems, are proven methods of addressing flooding with less of an impact on landscapes and towns. In flood management plans and schemes, the flood containments and increasing the flow capacity of river are prioritised over small-scale, more natural-based measures. We should be working with the landscape, using and enhancing natural defences, not working against it. Minister, how committed are you and the OPW to using more soft engineering measures, such as retention or storage upstream instead of flood containment options? And can you cite any examples of where schemes have predominantly used retention storage upstream over flood containment? Minister, as an activist in local campaigns and as a former county councillor, one of the most frustrating things has been the disregard for the opinions of local communities. Local and state authorities often just seem to steamroll through decisions, leaving people no option but to fundraise large amounts of money to appeal these decisions in court. Surely it should be the other way around. The burden of responsibility should be on central and local government to value and use local knowledge. If we want local democracy, we need to foster local participation, not just consultations that can be ignored, but real community-led planning. We need to listen to communities to develop workable solutions based on knowledge of the land and the cultural and natural heritage. Research from UCC's Dr. Alexandra Revez has highlighted the limited nature of community participation in flooding management processes and the need for greater consideration of social justice and environmental issues. In recent times across West Cork, there has been local concern about excessive works which irreparably damage natural landscapes and tourist amenities. However, official insistence and desperation amongst communities have forced these schemes through. This situation is now playing out in Cork City. There is heavy opposition from community and businesses in the flood relief scheme area, and there is little sign of their input being taken into consideration. The OPW and other state bodies should have the highest standards and best practice for public involvement. The Office of Public Works should empower communities and work with them. Minister, will you re-evaluate our flood management decision-making process and systems to ensure local communities are included in a much more substantial way? The annual transition statement makes reference to a coherent whole-of-government approach in addressing flooding, but developments on floodplains, inappropriate deforestation and the loss of urban green spaces show this is not the reality. A response from the state requires action on planning, tackling insurance companies who are not providing adequate cover for whole communities, and support for families and businesses who are terrified when flooding is forecasted. Insurance in particular is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. Flood relief schemes are only one part of the solution. In West Cork, towns such as Bandon, Skibbereen and Scull needed comprehensive responses that address their needs, not just higher walls. Minister, what assurances can you give us that there will be a whole-of-government approach, including robust planning policies and insurance reform? Thank you.
Deputy Antara.
Thank you, Deputy, for your questions. I know that all of the projects that you've referred to have been a cause of much local debate within your constituency. The Office of Public Works do their best to get the balance right between facilitating public consultation and debate, but then the delivery of projects to reduce flooding and reduce the risk of flooding, and those two objectives do also have public support. And from engaging with the Office of Public Works, they do want to ensure that our natural habitat, what we can do to make more use of natural assets in reducing flooding risk, that they can do that. But they're also, and the projects that you have highlighted here this afternoon are examples of that. There are still flooding risks that do require engineering and do require construction. And the Office of Public Works do believe that the engineering work that they have proposed is proportionate and the construction work that they are proposing is needed. In relation to the Bandon Flood Relief Scheme, I understand that this is now a project that a huge amount of work has gone into. As you acknowledged yourself, Deputy, I understand that the issue of the dredging of the riverbed was a matter of debate, and it was criticised by environmental campaigners. But Inland Fishery Ireland have collaborated with the OPW on the scheme, and the Office of Public Works do hope that this project will be completed subject to some High Court proceedings. In relation to the Lower Lee Flood Relief Scheme, the Office of Public Works have done a huge amount of work in relation to the scheme. It is, as the Deputy will be aware, the largest ever scheme in our state. It aims to protect around 2,000 properties, and the Office of Public Works have done a lot of work to address concerns in relation to the visual impact of the scheme. They do hope to be in a position where they can move ahead with this project because of the role that it will play in reducing flooding risk for so many homes and for so many businesses.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Cairns.
I'm just curious to know, has the OPW ever looked into using kind of a more whole-of-government approach with regard to planning and different things, using more soft engineering methods as a prevention method rather than always dealing with then the results of the problems of building on floodplains and stuff like that? Has the OPW started to look into methods like a watershed approach? Is that on their radar? Or is there instances that you could cite where we've used more soft engineering approaches?
Thank you, Deputy. Tara.
I'll follow up with the OPW in relation to that. I'm sure there are many occasions where they have used the approach there that the Deputy has described, and I will get that information shared with the Deputy. In relation to her point there regarding a whole-of-government approach, I'd have to say, from dealing with the OPW in lots of different areas, they do try to adopt a whole-of-government approach in relation to lots of different challenges that they have. The difficulty that they do have is in managing the issue of flooding on floodplains in which we have citizens living on. Those homes were built because that kind of approach wasn't used in the past. And the OPW are doing their best now through the availability of flood maps and making that information publicly available to try to reduce that happening again in the future. But in relation to your question there regarding instances in which the natural habitat and natural surroundings are used to reduce flooding risk, I'll get some examples and I will have them sent on to the Deputy.
Thank Teachta.
One last thing, just is it possible to also get analysis of how much the release of emissions through the production of concrete for big flood relief works in Ireland or in West Cork specifically? Is it possible to get a figure on something like that?
Thank you, Deputy. An Tara, very quick.
I'm not sure, and in fact I doubt if the OPW have information that is so specific to the use of concrete in construction work that they have done. I'll certainly ask, Deputy. I can imagine, I can guess where you're coming from, but I'm not sure they'll have the information, but I will ask.
Thank you, Minister. Next.